The silhouette of the burning homestead cut a jagged orange gash across the night sky as Isaac Alderman reined in his horse. What had started as a routine ride back to his ranch had suddenly turned into something far more horrific. The flames reached toward the heavens like desperate fingers, and the crackle and roar of the fire shattered the usual quiet of the Montana Territory. It was 1878, and civilization out here was still tenuous, at best a fragile thing easily broken by disaster, natural or otherwise. Isaac dismounted quickly, tying his horse to a fence post a safe distance from the inferno. As he approached cautiously, the heat slammed into him like a physical force, causing him to shield his face with his forearm. That's when he saw her, a woman, her dress scorched and torn, crawling away from the burning house on hands and knees. Without hesitation, Isaac rushed forward, kneeling beside her and gently turning her over. Her face was smudged with soot, her hair singed at the edges, but her eyes, a startling blue, were open and aware, filled with pain and fear. "You're alive," Isaac said, relief washing over him as he carefully helped her sit up. "That's what matters." The woman stared at him, coughing violently as she tried to speak. Her fingers clutched at his leather vest with surprising strength. "My father," she managed to gasp, pointing toward the blazing house. Isaac looked toward the inferno, his stomach sinking. The structure was fully engulfed now, the roof starting to collapse inward in a shower of sparks and burning timber. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No one could be alive in there now." Her face crumpled, a sob breaking from her throat as she seemed to collapse in on herself. Isaac caught her before she could fall, gathering her carefully into his arms. She was too light and trembling violently. "I'm Isaac Alderman," he said, lifting her as he stood. "I've got a ranch about 2 miles from here. I'm going to take you there, get you fixed up." "Faith," she whispered hoarsely, "Faith Blackwell." Isaac carried Faith to his horse, surprised at how easily she fit against him, as if she'd been made to be held in his arms. He pushed that thought away immediately. This woman had just lost everything, including, it seemed, her father. The last thing she needed was a stranger harboring inappropriate thoughts. He settled her carefully on his horse before mounting behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as he turned the horse toward his ranch. Faith leaned back against his chest, either from exhaustion or necessity, he wasn't sure which. Her breathing was ragged, each inhale seeming to catch painfully in her throat. "What happened back there?" Isaac asked softly as they rode through the darkness. Faith was quiet for so long he thought she might have passed out, but finally she spoke. "Bandits," she said, the word barely audible above the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. 3 men. They wanted money. Father refused. She didn't need to finish. Isaac had seen enough in his 30 years to fill in the blanks. The territory was still wild, lawless in many ways. Men who wanted easy money weren't above murder to get it. "Sheriff Daniels will need to know," Isaac said, more to himself than to Faith. "But that can wait till morning. You need rest and care first." As they crested the final hill before his property, the outline of the Alderman Ranch came into view against the star-lit sky. It wasn't grand, a solidly built main house, a barn and a bunkhouse for the 2 hands he employed, but it was his, built with his own sweat and determination after leaving his family's wealthy estate in Boston 5 years ago. Isaac helped Faith down from the horse when they reached the house, noting how she swayed on her feet. Without asking permission, he swept her up into his arms again and carried her up the porch steps. His foreman, Hank, must have heard them arriving because the door swung open before Isaac could kick it. "Boss?" Hank's weathered face registered shock at the sight of the soot-covered woman in Isaac's arms. "What in tarnation?" "The Blackwell place," Isaac said grimly. "Fire? Bandits," she says. "Go wake Mrs. Thompson and have her prepare the guest room." Hank nodded and disappeared down the hall toward the housekeeper's quarters, while Isaac gently set Faith down on a chair in the front room. Her eyes were glazed, shock setting in properly now that she was safe. "Faith," he said, kneeling before her and taking her cold hands in his, Mrs. Thompson is going to help you get cleaned up and check you for injuries. She used to be a nurse during the war. You're safe here." Faith looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and Isaac felt something shift inside his chest, a strange, unfamiliar sensation, as if something long dormant had suddenly awakened. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice raw from smoke. "Because it's the right thing to do," Isaac replied simply. He didn't add that something about her had called to him from the moment he saw her crawling from that fire, something that went beyond simple human decency. Mrs. Thompson appeared then, her gray hair hastily pinned up, her face concerned but efficient. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, already assessing Faith with a professional eye. "Come with me now. We'll get you cleaned up and into bed." Faith stood shakily, allowing Mrs. Thompson to lead her away. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at Isaac. "Thank you," she said softly. "I would have died there." Isaac nodded, unable to find words as he watched her disappear down the hall. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn day that reminded Isaac why he had fallen in love with Montana Territory in the first place. He had risen before the sun, unable to sleep properly, with thoughts of Faith and the burning homestead circling in his mind. After checking on the cattle with his ranch hands, he returned to the house, eager despite himself to see how Faith was faring. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table while Mrs. Thompson fussed over breakfast. She looked different in the light of day, younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 22 or 23 to his 30 years. Her hair, washed clean of soot, was a rich auburn that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. The borrowed dress from Mrs. Thompson hung loose on her slender frame, but somehow she still managed to look dignified. "Good morning," Isaac said, suddenly feeling awkward in his own kitchen. Faith looked up and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "Mr. Alderman, good morning." "Isaac, please," he said, taking a seat across from her. "How are you feeling?" "Physically, I'm fine," she replied, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Just some minor burns and scrapes. Mrs. Thompson took excellent care of me," her voice caught. "The rest will take time, I suppose." Isaac nodded, understanding all too well. He had lost his own mother years ago, and the pain had been sharp enough to drive him away from his family's Boston estate to start anew in the West. "I've sent Hank to town to fetch Sheriff Daniels," he said. "He should be here by midday. If you're up to it, he'll want to hear what happened." Faith nodded, her eyes distant. "I'll tell him what I can, though I fear it won't be much help." It was dark, and everything happened so quickly. Mrs. Thompson set a plate of eggs and bacon before each of them, then tactfully retreated to the pantry, giving them privacy while remaining within earshot, a proper chaperone for a young woman under a bachelor's roof. "Your father," Isaac began carefully. "Was it just the two of you at the homestead?" "Yes," Faith replied, setting down her fork. "My mother passed when I was 14. Father and I came west 2 years ago after he lost his position at the university in Chicago. He thought farming would be simpler." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He was a professor of literature, not a farmer. But we were managing." Isaac could picture it, a scholarly man and his daughter, out of their element, but determined to make a go of it. Such stories were common in the territories, though they didn't always end well. "Do you have other family? Someone I could send word to?" Faith shook her head. "No one. My mother was an only child, and Father's brother died in the war. There's no one left." The implications of her situation hung heavy in the air between them. A young, unmarried woman alone in the territories had few options, none of them particularly appealing. Isaac knew she was thinking the same thing when he saw the flash of fear cross her face before she carefully composed herself. "I won't impose on your hospitality for long," she said quietly. "Perhaps in town I could find work as a seamstress or—" "You'll stay here," Isaac interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. "At least until you're recovered and have had time to consider your options. The ranch is large enough, and Mrs. Thompson would appreciate the company." Relief flooded Faith's features before she schooled them into polite gratitude. "That's very generous of you, but I couldn't possibly—" "I insist," Isaac said, more gently this time. I have the space, and frankly, this house could use a woman's touch. He flushed slightly, realizing how that might sound. That is, Mrs. Thompson does her best, but she's more concerned with practicality than aesthetics. Faith smiled a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and transformed her face into something that made Isaac's heart stutter in his chest. "Thank you," she said simply. "I accept your kindness, at least for now." Sheriff Daniels arrived just after noon, his weathered face grim as he dismounted from his horse. Isaac met him on the porch, explaining the situation in low tones before leading him inside to where Faith waited in the front room. The interview was painful, but mercifully brief. Faith recounted the events of the previous night, 3 men arriving after dark, demanding money her father didn't have, the struggle that ensued, and how she had hidden in a root cellar accessible through the kitchen floor when her father had yelled for her to run. She had emerged only when the smell of smoke became overwhelming, finding the house ablaze and no sign of either her father or the attackers. "Could you identify any of these men if you saw them again, Miss Blackwell?" Sheriff Daniels asked, his pencil poised over a small notebook. Faith hesitated. "One of them, the leader, I think, had a scar across his chin like this." She traced a line from her lower lip to the bottom of her chin. "And he wore a distinctive belt buckle silver with a buffalo design. I noticed it when," she swallowed hard, "when he was standing over my father." Sheriff Daniels nodded, writing this down. "That might be enough. There's been a gang working the outlying homesteads for the past few months. Sounds like it could be Buck Harrow's crew." "Will you go out to the homestead, Sheriff?" Isaac asked. "I'll head there now," Daniels confirmed, tucking away his notebook, "though I doubt there's much left to find." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Miss Blackwell, I'm truly sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, unusual for these parts, but decent. I'll do my best to find the men responsible." After the sheriff had gone, a heavy silence fell over the house. Faith sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the walls. Isaac wasn't sure what to do or say. Comfort had never been his strong suit. "Would you like to lie down?" he finally asked. "You must be exhausted." Faith shook her head. "Actually, I would prefer to be useful. Sitting alone with my thoughts isn't helping." She looked up at him, a determined set to her jaw despite the sadness in her eyes. "Is there something I could do? Mending, perhaps, or cooking?" Isaac hesitated, then nodded. "Mrs. Thompson could use help with preparing dinner. We're expecting the cattle buyer from Helena today, and she always makes a fuss when there are guests." "Thank you," Faith said, standing. "I'm quite a good cook, actually. It was one of the few practical skills my father insisted I learn." As Faith disappeared into the kitchen, Isaac found himself standing alone in the front room, unsettled by feelings he couldn't quite name. This woman had upended his carefully ordered life in the span of a single night, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do about it. The cattle buyer, Mr. Reynolds, arrived late in the afternoon with his assistant. The negotiations went well. Isaac's breeding program had produced exceptional stock, and Reynolds was willing to pay top dollar. By the time they sat down to dinner, the deal was struck, and the mood was celebratory, despite the undercurrent of tragedy that had brought Faith into their midst. Faith had indeed proved herself in the kitchen. The meal was the finest Isaac had eaten since leaving Boston. Roast beef cooked to perfection, potatoes seasoned just right, and an apple pie that made even the stoic Reynolds close his eyes in appreciation. "Miss Blackwell," Reynolds said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, "if ranching doesn't work out for Alderman here, you should open a restaurant in Helena. You'd make a fortune." Faith smiled politely, though Isaac noticed it didn't reach her eyes. "You're very kind, Mr. Reynolds, but I'm merely assisting Mrs. Thompson. The credit is hers." "Nonsense," Mrs. Thompson interjected cheerfully. "I haven't made a pie that good in 20 years. The girl has a gift." Isaac watched as Faith accepted the compliments with grace, noting how she seamlessly filled the role of hostess despite her circumstances. She poured coffee, kept the conversation flowing, and made sure everyone's needs were met. It was as if she had been born to this life, though he knew from their earlier conversation that her background was far different. Later, after the guests had retired to the rooms prepared for them, and Mrs. Thompson had gone to bed, Isaac found Faith sitting alone on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "May I join you?" he asked, staying in the doorway until she nodded. He sat on the step below her, keeping a respectful distance. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky in numbers that still amazed him, even after 5 years in Montana. "You were wonderful tonight," Isaac said, breaking the silence. "Reynolds is usually a difficult man to please, but you charmed him completely." Faith smiled faintly. "My father entertained his colleagues often. I learned to be a hostess early." She pulled the shawl tighter. "It felt good, actually, to do something normal, something I understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft hooting of an owl. "Tell me about your father," Isaac said finally, "if you don't mind talking about him." Faith was quiet for so long Isaac thought she might not answer, but then she began to speak, her voice soft in the darkness. "He loved poetry, Wordsworth especially. He would recite it while we worked in the garden or repaired fences." A small laugh escaped her. "He was terrible at practical things. It took him 3 tries to build a chicken coop that wouldn't fall down, but he could recite entire plays from memory." As she spoke, painting a picture of the gentle scholar who had raised her alone after her mother's death, Isaac found himself drawn into her story, seeing glimpses of the life she had lived before tragedy struck. "He sounds like a remarkable man," Isaac said when she finally fell silent. He was. Faith looked directly at him then, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "He would have thanked you for what you've done for me. And so do I again. Not everyone would take in a stranger this way." "You're not a stranger anymore," Isaac said, the words coming unbidden. "And I'm glad to help. Truly." Something passed between them, then a moment of connection that transcended the short time they had known each other. Faith broke it first, standing and gathering her shawl more tightly around her. "Good night, Isaac," she said softly. "Thank you for listening." "Good night, Faith," he replied, remaining on the porch long after she'd gone inside, trying to make sense of the emotions stirring within him. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Faith helped Mrs. Thompson with the household tasks, proving herself adept at everything from mending to baking. Isaac went about his ranch work, though he found himself returning to the house more frequently than usual, drawn by Faith's presence. A week after the fire, Sheriff Daniels returned with grim news. They had found what remained of Mr. Blackwell's body in the ruins of the homestead, along with evidence confirming Faith's account. There was no sign of the attackers, though Daniels was following leads that suggested Buck Harrow's gang had been spotted heading north toward the Canadian border. Faith received the news with quiet dignity, though Isaac noticed she disappeared into a room for several hours afterward. When she emerged for dinner, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, her composure intact. "Sheriff Daniels has arranged for a proper burial tomorrow," Isaac told her gently. "I'll accompany you, if you'd like." "Thank you," Faith said, her voice steady despite the grief evident in her eyes. "I would appreciate that." The burial was a small affair, just Faith, Isaac, Mrs. Thompson, and a few neighbors who had known the Blackwells slightly. The preacher said words that seemed insufficient in the face of such a senseless loss, but Faith stood tall, her back straight as a pine tree, even as tears silently tracked down her cheeks. Isaac stood beside her, offering silent support, and when her hand sought his during the final prayer, he took it without hesitation, feeling the tremor that ran through her despite her outward composure. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the autumn sun warm on their backs, the mountains rising majestic and indifferent in the distance. As they approached the house, Faith finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what to do next," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I can't impose on your hospitality forever." Isaac felt an unexpected pang at her words. "You're not imposing," he said quickly. "In fact, Mrs. Thompson says you've been a godsend. I've never seen the house run so smoothly. Faith smiled slightly. That's kind of you to say, but we both know this isn't a proper arrangement. A young, unmarried woman living in the home of an unmarried man. People will talk if they haven't started already. Isaac couldn't deny it. Even in the relatively loose social structure of the territories, there were standards of propriety. "What are you thinking, then?" he asked, dreading her answer. The thought of Faith leaving had become increasingly distressing to him over the past week. "I received a letter yesterday," she said. "Sheriff Daniels was kind enough to write to the school board in Helena on my behalf. They've offered me a position teaching the younger children. It's not much money, but there's a room above the schoolhouse where I could live." Isaac felt a hollowness open up inside him. It was a perfect solution, respectable work that suited her educated background, independence without vulnerability. He should be happy for her. Instead, he felt as if she had announced she was moving to the moon. "When would you leave?" he asked, working to keep his voice neutral. "The position starts at the beginning of next month," Faith replied. "That's 3 weeks from now." 3 weeks. Just 21 days before she would be gone from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. The thought was unbearable. "I see," Isaac said, unable to come up with anything more eloquent. "Well, I'm glad you found a position that suits you." Faith looked at him oddly, as if she had expected a different response. "Yes," she said after a moment, "it seems the best option available to me." They finished the ride home in silence, an awkwardness between them that hadn't been there before. That night, Isaac sat at his desk long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ranch accounts without really seeing them. His thoughts kept returning to Faith the way she moved through his home as if she belonged there, the sound of her laughter when she spoke with Mrs. Thompson, the graceful gestures of her hands as she worked. In just over a week, she had become essential to him in a way he hadn't thought possible. The idea of her leaving for Helena filled him with a sense of loss so acute it startled him. It wasn't just physical attraction, though she was certainly beautiful. It was something deeper, more fundamental, as if she had awakened parts of him that had been dormant for years. Isaac closed the ledger with a sigh. He was being ridiculous. Faith had lost everything: her father, her home, her sense of security. The last thing she needed was a love-struck rancher complicating her recovery. She needed stability, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. If that meant teaching in Helena, then he should support her decision, not sulk like a schoolboy. With that resolution firmly in mind, Isaac blew out the lamp and headed to bed, determined to be nothing but supportive of Faith's plans, regardless of his own feelings. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of autumn activity. The ranch was busy with the final preparations for winter hay to be stacked, livestock to be counted and assessed, buildings to be secured against the coming snow. Faith threw herself into helping Mrs. Thompson preserve the last of the garden harvest, filling the pantry with jars of vegetables, fruits, and jellies. Isaac kept his resolution to be supportive, even going so far as to offer to drive Faith to Helena himself when the time came. If she noticed his somewhat formal demeanor, she gave no sign, though sometimes he would catch her watching him with a puzzled expression. One evening, a week before Faith was set to leave, Isaac returned from checking fence lines to find her sitting alone on the porch swing, a book open in her lap. The sight of her there, so perfectly at home, made his chest ache. "Good evening," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "What are you reading?" Faith held up the book so he could see the title. "Wordsworth. I found it in your study. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Isaac replied, surprised. "I didn't take you for a snoop, though." Faith blushed. "Mrs. Thompson asked me to dust in there. The book caught my eye because it was my father's favorite. I was surprised to find it here." "I brought quite a few books from Boston," Isaac explained, taking a seat beside her on the swing. "My father was something of a collector. I couldn't leave them all behind." "You never talk about your life before Montana," Faith observed, closing the book carefully. Isaac shrugged. "Not much to tell. Wealthy family, expectations I couldn't meet, the usual story." "I doubt it's usual," Faith said, her eyes meeting his directly. "You're not usual, Isaac Alderman." There was something in her gaze that made Isaac's heart beat faster, a warmth, an interest that went beyond mere politeness. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps she felt some fraction of what he felt for her. "Nor are you," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility. Isaac found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by some invisible force. Faith didn't pull away, her eyes still fixed on his. The spell was broken by the sound of Mrs. Thompson calling from inside the house. "Miss Faith? I could use your help with these linens." Faith blinked, the connection broken. "I should go," she said, rising quickly. "Mrs. Thompson is teaching me to fold fitted sheets properly." "A valuable skill," Isaac said, trying to hide his disappointment behind a smile. Faith paused at the door, looking back at him. "Will you be joining us for dinner? Thompson mentioned you sometimes eat with the hands when work runs late." "I'll be there," Isaac promised, knowing he would rearrange the heavens themselves if it meant spending more time with Faith. She smiled that rare, full smile that transformed her face and disappeared inside. Isaac remained on the porch, the swing moving gently beneath him, his thoughts in turmoil. He was falling in love with Faith Blackwell. No, that wasn't quite right. He had already fallen, hard and completely. The question was what, if anything, he intended to do about it. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. The following day, a telegram arrived from Helena. The school board had moved up the start date for Faith's position. They needed her to arrive in 3 days, not 7, as originally planned. When Isaac delivered this news to Faith, he watched her face carefully, looking for any sign that she was reluctant to leave so soon. All he saw was practical concern. 3 days, she repeated, biting her lower lip. That doesn't give me much time to prepare. I can take you, Isaac offered. It's a full day's journey by wagon, but we could leave the day after tomorrow. Faith nodded, her expression unreadable. That would be very kind. Thank you. That evening, after dinner, Isaac found himself unable to settle. The thought of Faith leaving in just 2 days made him restless, almost desperate. He needed to speak with her, to at least tell her how he felt before she disappeared from his life. He found her in the garden, despite the chill in the air. She was standing near the small plot where Mrs. Thompson grew herbs, her arms wrapped around herself, staring up at the stars. "Faith," Isaac said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, not surprised to see him. "Isaac, I was just thinking about you." His heart leapt at her words. "You were?" Faith nodded, her expression serious in the moonlight. "I've been trying to find the right words to thank you for everything you've done, for saving my life that night, for giving me a safe place to grieve, for helping me find a way forward." "You don't need to thank me," Isaac said, moving closer to her. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Faith said firmly, "not anyone. What you did, what you've done since, it's exceptional, Isaac. You're exceptional." The night air seemed to crackle between them with unspoken words. "Faith," Isaac began, gathering his courage. "I need to tell you something before you leave." She looked at him expectantly, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. "I don't want you to go to Helena," he said, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know it's selfish of me, and I know you need to build your own life after everything that's happened. But these past weeks with you here, it's felt right, Faith. You've brought something to this ranch, to my life, that I didn't even know was missing." Faith's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "What are you saying, Isaac?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you," Isaac said, taking her hands in his. "I know it's too soon, that we've only known each other a short time, but I can't let you leave without telling you how I feel. I'm not asking you to stay if you don't want to. I just needed you to know." Faith was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I've been offered a respectable position in Helena," she said. "A chance to support myself, to be independent." Isaac nodded, his heart sinking. "I understand." "But," Faith continued, her fingers tightening around his, Every time I think about leaving here, leaving you, it feels wrong, like I'm walking away from something important. Hope flared in Isaac's chest. What are you saying? Faith took a deep breath. I'm saying that I've been fighting my feelings for you because it seemed impossible, too fast, too complicated given how we met. But the truth is, Isaac Alderman, I think I'm falling in love with you too. Joy surged through Isaac, so powerful it nearly took his breath away. He pulled Faith closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. Stay, he whispered, not as my guest, not as Mrs. Thompson's helper. Stay because you want to, because we might have something worth exploring together. Faith's eyes searched his, as if looking for any sign of doubt or insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Yes, she said, a smile blooming across her face. I'll stay. Isaac's restraint broke. He leaned forward, capturing her lips with his in a kiss that was gentle, yet filled with all the emotion he had been holding back. Faith responded immediately, her arms sliding around his neck, her body melting against his as if she had been waiting for this moment as desperately as he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I should probably write to the school board in Helena, Faith said, a note of mischief in her voice. I'm afraid their new teacher won't be arriving after all. Isaac laughed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. I'll help you draft it in the morning, he promised, before kissing her again under the vast Montana sky. The news that Faith Blackwell would be staying at the Alderman Ranch spread quickly through the surrounding area. Some eyebrows were raised. At first, a young unmarried woman living in the home of a bachelor was unusual, with Mrs. Thompson as chaperone. But Isaac and Faith were discreet in public, and it soon became clear to most that their relationship was heading toward marriage. Sheriff Daniels returned in early November with more news. Buck Harrow and one of his men had been captured near the Canadian border, caught trying to sell stolen goods in a frontier trading post. They were being held in the Helena jail, awaiting trial for multiple robberies and murders, including the attack on the Blackwell homestead. Would you be willing to testify when the time comes? Daniels asked Faith. Your identification of Harrow's scar and belt buckle could be crucial. Faith hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, I'll testify. My father deserves justice. Isaac squeezed her hand in silent support, proud of her courage. It probably won't be until spring, Daniels explained. The circuit judge won't be through these parts again until then. After the sheriff had gone, Faith was quiet. Her thoughts clearly on the coming trial and the painful memories it would revive. You don't have to do this if it's too difficult, Isaac told her gently. Faith shook her head. No, I need to do it, not just for Father, but for myself. I need to look these men in the eye, to see them face consequences for what they did. Isaac nodded, understanding. I'll be with you every step of the way. As November deepened toward winter, Faith and Isaac's relationship blossomed. They spent evenings reading together by the fire, Faith often selecting poems from the Wordsworth volume that had first sparked their deeper connection. During the days, Faith threw herself into learning about ranch life, proving surprisingly adept at many tasks despite her academic background. My father may have been a scholar, she explained one day when Isaac expressed surprise at her skill with a difficult mare, but he believed women should be capable. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to think for myself. He did an excellent job, Isaac said, watching as she confidently handled the horse that had given his most experienced hands trouble. As the first snow fell, blanketing the ranch in white silence, Isaac knew it was time to formalize their relationship. He had been carrying his mother's ring in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. It came on a clear, cold evening when the sunset had painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Isaac had asked Faith to join him for a walk, despite the chill, wanting privacy for what he was about to do. They stood together on a small rise overlooking the ranch, Faith's arm tucked through his, her cheeks pink from the cold. It's beautiful, she said, gazing out at the view. I never thought I could love a place this much, especially after losing your home, Isaac finished for her. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Faith, when I found you that night and crawling away from the fire, I had no idea you would come to mean so much to me. You've brought light and warmth into my life in ways I never expected." Faith's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "Isaac." He dropped to one knee in the snow, pulling the ring from his pocket. It was a simple design, a gold band with a single diamond, but it glowed in the last light of sunset. "Faith Blackwell, I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Faith's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, Isaac felt a sense of rightness so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. This woman, who had come into his life through tragedy, had somehow become his greatest joy. They were married on Christmas Day, in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Thompson decorated the house with evergreen boughs and red berries, and the local preacher performed the service in front of the fireplace. Sheriff Daniels attended, along with Isaac's ranch hands and a few neighbors who had become friends. Faith wore a dress of deep blue velvet that Isaac had ordered specially from Helena, and her hair was adorned with a wreath of the winter roses that Mrs. Thompson had somehow coaxed into blooming in her indoor garden. "I, Isaac, take you, Faith, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Isaac said, his voice clear and strong as he repeated the preacher's words. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Faith spoke her vows in return, her eyes never leaving his, Isaac knew that the fire that had brought her to him, terrible as it was, had also forged the beginning of something beautiful, a love that would warm them through all the seasons to come. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in new ways, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bodies expressing what words could not fully convey. In the quiet aftermath, Faith lay with her head on Isaac's chest, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "When you found me that night," she murmured, "and you said, 'You're alive, that's what matters,' I didn't believe you. I couldn't imagine that anything mattered anymore." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And now?" Faith propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with eyes full of love. "Now I know you were right. Being alive matters because it brought me here, to you, to this life we're building together." Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softened earth. Faith planted a garden larger than Mrs. Thompson had ever attempted, including a special section of wildflowers in memory of her father. In April, as promised, the circuit judge arrived in Helena, and the trial of Buck Harrow and his accomplice began. Faith testified clearly and without wavering, identifying Harrow by his distinctive scar and belt buckle. When Harrow was sentenced to hang for his crimes, Faith felt not joy but a quiet sense of closure. "Is it wrong," she asked Isaac as they rode back to the ranch after the verdict, "that I don't feel happier about the outcome? They killed my father, destroyed our home. Shouldn't I be glad they're facing justice?" Isaac considered her question carefully before answering. "I think it speaks well of you that you don't find pleasure in anyone's suffering, even those who deserve punishment. Your father raised a compassionate woman." Faith smiled at him gratefully, leaning against his shoulder as the wagon carried them home. Summer brought new joy to the Alderman ranch. In June, Faith discovered she was expecting their first child, due to arrive in the early winter. Isaac was overjoyed at the news, lifting Faith off her feet and spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "A baby," he said in wonder, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "The first of many, I hope," Faith said, covering his hand with her own. "I always wanted a large family." As Faith's pregnancy progressed, the ranch prospered as well. Isaac's breeding program continued to yield excellent results, and the new irrigation system he had installed with Faith's help increased their hay production significantly. They were able to hire 2 additional hands, making the workload more manageable for everyone. In the evenings, Isaac would often find Faith in what they now called the library, a room that had once been a seldom-used parlor, but was now filled with books, including those Faith had managed to salvage from her father's homestead after the fire. "What shall we name the baby?" Isaac asked one such evening, joining Faith on the comfortable sofa they had placed near the window. Faith looked up from the baby blanket she was knitting. "I was thinking, if it's a boy, perhaps William, after my father." "William Alderman." Isaac tried the name out. "I like it, and if it's a girl." "Elizabeth, after your mother?" Faith suggested. Isaac felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who thought to honor his family alongside her own. "It's perfect," he said, leaning over to kiss her softly. December brought heavy snow, and with it, the arrival of their child, a daughter with Faith's auburn hair and Isaac's gray eyes. Elizabeth William Alderman, they named her, honoring both sides of her heritage. "She's perfect," Isaac whispered, holding his tiny daughter for the first time, marveling at her delicate fingers and the determined set of her tiny mouth. "She's strong," Faith said proudly from the bed where she rested after the long labor, "just like her father." "And beautiful, like her mother," Isaac countered, carefully returning the baby to Faith's arms. As he watched his wife nursing their daughter, Isaac was struck anew by how close he had come to missing this life. If he had taken a different route that night, if he had been just a few minutes later reaching the burning homestead. "What are you thinking?" Faith asked, noticing his introspection. "I'm thinking how lucky I am," Isaac replied honestly. "That night, when I found you crawling from the fire, all I could think was, thank God she's alive. I had no idea then that you would become my whole world." Faith smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "From tragedy to this," she said softly, "it's more than I could have ever hoped for." "This is just the beginning," Isaac promised, squeezing her hand gently as their daughter dozed between them. And he was right. The years that followed brought more children, 2 sons who grew tall and strong like their father, and another daughter who had her mother's quick mind and love of books. The Alderman Ranch expanded, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Faith never forgot her father or the terrible night that had changed her life, but the pain softened with time, cushioned by the love that surrounded her. She established a small school on the ranch for their children and those of the hands, putting her teaching skills to good use without having to leave the home and family she cherished. On the 10th anniversary of the night they met, Isaac surprised Faith with a special gift, a small cabin built near a stream that ran through their property, filled with books and comfortable furniture, a place where she could write the novel she had been working on in secret for years. "How did you know?" she asked, amazed as she explored the cabin. "Mrs. Thompson found your manuscript while cleaning," Isaac admitted. "She didn't read it, but she thought I should know. You're talented, Faith. Your words deserve to be shared." Faith embraced him tightly. "Thank you for always supporting my dreams, even the ones I'm afraid to speak aloud." Isaac held her close, thinking of all they had been through together, the fire that had nearly taken her life, the building of their ranch and family, the everyday challenges and joys they had shared. "That night," he said softly, "when I told you that being alive was what mattered, I had no idea how much you would come to matter to me. You crawled from those flames and straight into my heart, Faith Alderman." Faith looked up at him, her eyes still as blue and clear as they had been that first night, though now they held the wisdom and love of their years together. "And I'm so glad I did," she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "So very glad." As they stood together in the doorway of the cabin, looking out over the land they had nurtured together, the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of orange and gold, not unlike the flames that had first brought them together, but beautiful rather than destructive, a reminder that even from the darkest moments, light and love could emerge.